Hi, Barb. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk to us. Why don't you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Well, I went to school for computer science and mathematics. I worked as a developer for a couple of decades, went into network engineering, ended up here at Monsanto, and now I'm an Agile coach.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what you do as an Agile coach here?
So here, I do a lot of different things. I have 6 teams that I actually coach specifically. Their product manager, their team members, anybody that touches those teams, business partners, management, whatever. I also do training, I do research, and I support my fellow coaches.
Great. So Barb, you're a big Modern Agile fan and you've done a lot of training here at Monsanto. So why don't you share a little bit more about the mindset and what is Modern Agile?
Absolutely. I am a big Modern Agile fan. We discovered it here about a year and a half ago. We watched a video from Agile 2016 where Josh Karyevsky talked a lot about kind of the Agile principles and manifesto and how they really haven't been inspected and adapted over the years. So he came up with Modern Agile, which is essentially 4 principles that are less about software design and more about business and product delivery. So it's a really great way to port Agile over to a lot of non-IT departments and help people understand it easily and quickly.
So what are the 4 principles for Modern Agile? Can you share a little bit with us?
So the first one is make people awesome. It sounds very simplistic, and it's not just about customer centricity, but about people centricity. So it's about making everybody who's currently in your view and lifting them up. So your coworkers, your business partners, your team members, and just anybody that you interact with. How can I make them better? And in turn, if we have a whole culture of this make people awesome, it'll lift the entire company up. The second one is make safety a prerequisite. And it's not just about physical safety, although it certainly is about that, but also psychological safety. So being able to speak up in a meeting, being able to call out things when they're wrong, being able to give strong feedback. It's also about financial safety, so protecting your company's financial assets, protecting our freedom to operate. So it's compliance, it's regulatory. So when they say make safety a prerequisite, it's keeping everything safe that surrounds your product. The third one is experiment and learn rapidly, which is one of my favorites. I actually took this for the first time over to our lab, which is full of a lot of scientists, and they said, well, yeah, that's kind of what we do every day. We build an entire company based on experiment and learn rapidly, but we never thought to apply it to IT. And how it's applied to IT is, basically the idea of doing things in small chunks. So what's the smallest piece that we can do to prove that we're on the right path? So it's cutting your work down into small experiments to kind of make your path go a lot quicker. That kind of eliminates risk as you're checking every so often and testing. It eliminates the chance that you're going to get to the end and not have what you want. There's a lot of great reasons to experiment, and you can even do that in a non-IT team. If you look at your day, whatever your work is, and you think, what can I do better tomorrow? What's one small thing that I can try out that I've always wanted to try out and see if it works for a small period of time? So experiment and learn rapidly can really propel a department very quickly forward. The last one is deliver value continuously, which sounds fairly obvious, but it's really hard for some people. If your value is let's say your value is making steering wheels, you can easily measure that by how many you make in a day and what's the quality for that. But most people have a hard time figuring out how to measure the value of what they do on a regular basis, especially if you're not a technical or easily, countable work team. One of the things that I do is I keep a value journal. So I write down kind of what I do every day. Here are the people I touched. Here are the meetings I facilitated. Here's the coaching I did. Here are the meetings I just attended. And then I decide at the end of the day what were the 2 most valuable things what were the two least valuable things? Could I have made those more valuable, maybe by participating more or preparing more? Or maybe I just don't need to go to that meeting and somebody else is better to go. So deliver value continuously doesn't mean at a breakneck speed. It means at a kind of a sustainable pace. How can I just continue to always look for the next piece of value that I can provide?
So Barb, can you share with us on why you do retrospectives and what's one of your favorite way of facilitating a sprint retrospective?
So I think the retrospective is probably the most important thing that a team can do. In fact, it's something that a non-IT and non-technical team can do, and it's something that your team can do even if they're not doing anything else in Agile or Scrum. It's just to sit down for an hour and celebrate what you've done right, things that have gone well, things that made you happy, things that are moving in the right direction. Make sure you call out people who have done exceptional things and start it off on a positive note. Then you kind of move to what are some things that we could possibly improve? What are some things that are holding us back? Maybe some things that are blockers, maybe some things that, we really wish we could do better, or even some things that we have some really great ideas about how to improve it and how to make it more innovative. And call out those things. At the end, you want to come up with some action items. I like to call them experiments because they really should be experiments. If one of your action items is, we would really like to get better at mobbing, then your Agile coach or Scrum Master should help you pull that out. What do you want to get better about mobbing? How will you know when you're better? Where are you starting now? What is your process and what would you like to try? And what's the time box for that trying? Are you going to, we're going to try to switch drivers on mobbing every 25 minutes and then take a 5-minute break. And we're going to try that over the course of 2 months. Or maybe we're just going to try it for a week because we're not really sure we even need to do it. And then we'll think of something else. Maybe next week we'll try, switching drivers in a different way or just pairing. So a team should come out of it with, I would say, 1 or 2 really strong experiments to try over the next sprint. Now, sometimes after a team's been doing Scrum for a while, they might get a little tired of the usual, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do? What I really like to do is then start to phrase it in metaphors. So I have actually done things like during Shark Week, I did a shark retrospective where I brought in, DVD boxes from, 5-headed sharks, sand sharks, Sharknado, and kind of compared it to, what's going well. I mean, Sharknado is making billions of dollars. How are we kind of, doing this big hit? Or, here's a shark movie that didn't do so well. Because when they start to talk in metaphors, some things start to come out that wouldn't necessarily come out when you're just having a straight talk, especially when it's really hard. I've done things like a Star Trek retrospective or a Back to the Future perspective. But my favorite one that I did was really the first one that got me started on this kind of creative retrospective idea. And it was based on funretrospectives.com. It was a 3 Little Pigs. So I had a team that I'd been through for a while. We were kind of tired of regular retrospectives. So I pulled in 3 Little Pigs and we started talking about, here are the things that are made out of straw. So the things that are easily falling apart. Here are the things made out of sticks, so things that aren't as strong as they could be, but they're still pretty good, and things made out of brick that we do absolutely solid. And all of a sudden, one of the developers said, hey, you know who's the big bad wolf? It's this guy on this other team. So he was, causing blockers for the team. He was, not getting back to them in a speedy period of time, but they never thought that he was a true problem until we started talking in this 3 Little Pigs metaphor. Of course, then we developed an experiment about how we could pull him in and get him more on board with what we're doing and better communication. But things like that tend to come out when you're not really talking directly about the problems, but maybe you're talking about, little pigs or sharks or, Back to the Future.
Nice, thank you. So Barb, can you share with us on how you facilitate sprint planning or an iteration planning?
Sure. Sprint planning is a great way to start off your sprint. It's a good time to, kind of draw that line in the sand. Our other sprint is over. We've had our retrospective. Now we're ready to move on. We've got a brand new, clean 2 weeks that hasn't been touched. and now we're going to try to figure out how much we can fill it with. So what some teams like to do is estimate with story points. What you do is you figure out, are your stories big, are they small, are they kind of medium size, and you assign a Fibonacci number to it. Over the course of time, you average those together and you figure out about how much work you can take in a sprint based on adding up those numbers. So you might take, one team might take 12 points in a sprint, one might take 20. It depends on the makeup of the team, what they know, what they don't know, and just how they look at the stories. So a lot of times the team will come in having looked at all of their stories ahead of time, know that they're taking 20 points in a sprint, and they might just draw the line, 20 points, everybody says good to go. More often than not, those stories need a little bit more work. So they're asking their product manager for more information. They're judging like how much they don't know and what kind of effort that might take. And they're looking at the priority of it. So, if you have something that's really large, you might want to kind of break that down and put some of those little parts in the next sprint if they're not really a high priority part. So what some teams do is they try to break their stories down into consistent parts. So your stories might consistently take about 3 days. And so how many stories you can take. What that does is it forces you to look at the story and figure out how it can actually be broken down. So you're kind of looking at it in pieces, and I really like that method, and that's really good for kind of more mature teams that are really good at judging. If you're not a mature team and there's a lot you don't know, then probably story pointing is for you. What I like to do then is help the team figure out how much they can take. I ask questions like, can everybody work on all of these stories? Or are these stories just kind of leaning toward one person's kind of talent or whatever? Should there be pairing, mobbing? How do you want to work on these stories? What do you need? Do you need some architecture or some data work on these stories that also need to be added in? So I ask a lot of questions about how they intend to work the sprint. In addition, a team that has production support, if they keep track of how much production support they typically get, so let's say in a typical 2-week period, they do about 20% production support. What I like to have them do is figure out how many story points they can take. So say they can take 10 story points in 2 weeks and then only plan for 20% of that. So they commit to 8 story points, and then when the production support comes in, nobody's freaking out because they have room for it. But if production support doesn't come in, they can always pull more things in at the end. So I like to ask those kind of questions. What do you expect to come up? Who's going to be on vacation? Do we have any holidays? Those are all things that fit in that a team might not necessarily think about during story planning.
So Barb, while we are in the estimation topic, so let's talk about some of the anti-patterns in estimation.
Sure.
What have you seen?
So I've seen, obviously, I think everybody has seen development managers or even product managers trying to compare teams based on their velocity.
Yeah.
And of course, every team estimates differently, based on kind of what their knowledge level is, and just what their feelings are. In fact, I remember once I had a team and they were, going at about 27 points in a sprint. So their stories were about 3 or 5 points. We got a new person on the team.
Yeah.
And the first story that we estimated, they all throw down a 3, he throws down a 20.
Yeah.
So he's like, well, my team's doing 140 points in a sprint.
Yeah. I'm working with a team that does really high sizing, so.
And it shouldn't matter, right? Yeah. The idea is not to get higher in your velocity. It's to be consistent. So if you consistently take 20 points in a sprint, the more you know, the lower you're going to estimate those stories.
Yeah.
So even if you're always at 20 points, you're still getting more work done.
Yeah. Just talk about the sprint review, and then we can also touch a little bit more into sprint demo, because those are kind of slightly different things. So how do you facilitate a sprint review, and then what's the significance of sprint review?
So the sprint review is the awesome chance for the team to show everything that they've done to their stakeholders, to their business partners, to their users. What's a really great sprint review is when a lot of people come, and usually what happens is they give kudos to the team when they do a great job, and then they say, they ask questions about it. Maybe there's something that didn't quite come out in the communication that they had during the sprint, so there's a chance for them to change that. And then more often than not, they have a lot more ideas, which the product manager can immediately put on the backlog. Now, that doesn't always happen in the real world, right? What happens is, business partners, stakeholders, they're busy. So they don't always come to the sprint review. And then the team is sitting there with one person or two people, and they've worked really hard and they have a lot to show, and they just don't have the attendance. So I think it's really up to the product manager, because they know who's important, to make sure that people come, that they get excited, that they understand how this helps the team to work better in the future.
So as a coach, let's say if there's a Scrum Master, if the stakeholders are not showing up in the sprint review meeting, how would you coach a Scrum Master outside of the team? How should he go about resolving that challenge for the team?
So, like I said, it would be ideal if the product manager would track these people down. But, I've definitely done it as a Scrum Master and an Agile coach. I would just, kind of find out what's your interest in the product. And, maybe they came sometime and the team showed some features that were of no interest to them that they didn't use. And maybe at that time the team can send out an agenda ahead of time so that people that are interested. And then we can find out what people are interested and invite them personally. So that's kind of what I would advise the Scrum Master to do, was to look at why people aren't coming, rather than just kind of beating the bushes, forcing them to come. It's a really great ceremony. What are they not getting out of it? And how can the team make it better for them?
And in sprint planning, which principle do you think it reflects in the idea of like doing something for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever that time box is, and then showing it to the end users from a modern Agile perspective?
I think from a modern Agile perspective, it definitely makes them awesome. So the more that the users and the stakeholders see the final product or the iterative, deliverables, and the more that they get to know the team and get to know how the team thinks, and the more that they share with the team about the product and how they use the product, I think that definitely makes people awesome. It helps them to deliver more value because they know what the people want and they know how they're going to use it. So there's no surprises, right, at the end. So I think that, and I think also you can make safety a prerequisite, because a lot of times stakeholders will have questions about, how do you protect proprietary information in this? What's the security in this? So things that the team have probably already thought of, they will also kind of hit on, and maybe they will hit on something the team didn't think of. But then, the more that they hear that the team did think of it, the more confident they become in that team.
Nicely said. So Barb, let's just discuss some challenges with Agile.
Okay.
What have you seen? What are some of your big challenges that you've kind of faced and you're trying to resolve?
I think the biggest challenge, and I don't know, maybe it's the biggest challenge everybody faces, is communication. Way back when teams are working in Waterfall, there's very little communication at all between departments. And so departments and people just don't know how to talk to each other. And sometimes we bring teams together and then we just expect them to know how to give each other feedback, or expect them to understand how to bring things out in a retrospective, or how to handle frustration. And in their past, they've all worked, very siloed and alone, and they don't know how to do that. And that's not just for the team. That's also a lot of people. Whether it's business partners, product managers, whatever, you have to coach them on how to do all of this stuff. You can't just say, okay, everybody have a stand up. You have to coach them on how to share what's valuable.
Yeah, so actually, you shared prior in the waterfall world. I actually never had a pure waterfall experience. I've always been in roles where they said they're agile, they were not. But what was it like to be in like waterfall projects? And can you share a little bit about your experience, some challenges that you faced with waterfall?
Sure. In fact, I'll go way back to the beginning of my development cycle, or the beginning of my development career, when we didn't have all these other people. We didn't have business analysts. We didn't have testers. We did everything, and we sat around and talked about code all day, and we talked to users, and it was almost more agile then than afterwards. And then I went to work for companies, and they started to pull those things out. They had business analyst teams, they had test teams, they had all these separate things. And you only got to see a very small part of what you built. A lot of times you would get some very specific instructions, and you would just code it, and then you would send it off. At a time, I spent a lot of time writing automated tests, which was a really interesting part of the pipeline to be in Waterfall. What happened was, for a couple months, business analysts would come up with the requirements, and then they'd have one meeting, hand it off to the developers who would do coding for about 6 months. They'd pass it off to us. Of course, we test last at that time, which is not the optimal way. If we found anything in the design, in the code, in the very idea of what they were doing and the logic, it was too late. They're just like, write a test for it, how it works now, and we'll just send it out. All you have to do is have all these tests done. So there are, quite a few companies in that day working in kind of that handoff method.
So you said before these roles were created, you said developers were talking to the actual users, and they were...
Right. I worked in a hospital system. So even though we didn't sit in the hospital, we actually had a separate IT building. We spent a lot of time over there. I wrote software for pharmacies, for pharmacists, and I would go over there and talk to the pharmacists. I would spend a day with them, and I would, follow them around and even help them out a little bit and everything. So I knew how they would work. And then I, tried to create some software for them.
Nice.
And,
So you've been a developer. Then let's just kind of switch our perspective, and let's look at from like developers' perspective, right? Whenever we go into the team, they have had some experience of Scrum or some methodology, some mixed up methodology, and they have some challenges. So what are some of the challenges do you think developers face, since you are a developer at one point with the Scrum or some version of Agile?
So if you go to a lot of the developer interviews, you hear people say, I worked at a place that did Agile, but they didn't really do Agile. So some of it is that some places adopt what they like, and then they don't really give the developers a voice. More often than not, they say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to work in Scrum, so we're going to do these time boxes, we're going to do these stand-ups, and then, we're still going to have all this management, and we're going to tell you what to do. So they come in, and they're kind of gun-shy. They have a lot of baggage. They've worked in it before. They're skeptical.
They are.
They are. And so you will have a team of people that are all carrying different types of baggage. And so you have to almost level set. And I always tell people the first thing I do with a new team is let them know that I'm not scary. I'm not going to be pound on the table, kind of give you a lot of rules. Let's just talk about what's realistic, what we like to do. And usually once you get them in that place where they're not so scared, then you come at it from that experiment and learn rapidly. You're like, okay, let's try this for a couple of weeks and then see. And once you do that a couple times and they see that you are actually serious about making changes based on how they feel, then they start to get more comfortable. So I think that's our biggest challenge.
I've definitely faced that. A lot of the times Agile or Scrum or some version of this is more of a mandate. People have to comply. Now somebody shows up, the company went Agile, and they have a lot of rules that they have to follow, which is kind of against the Agile principle, Agile mindset. Where Agile is more about learning, discovering better ways to developing software, and making our users happy. So,
and it's true. And I know we like to start with Scrum, which actually has very few rules. It is a very lightweight framework, but it's a great way for a team to get right off the ground. I like Scrum because you can teach it in the morning and they can start it in the afternoon. It's that easy. Then you modify it because every new team essentially looks the same because they start off with the basics for the Scrum work, but every advanced team looks completely different because as they're retrospecting, they're inspecting and adapting the way that they personally like to work.
Yeah, I like that perspective because, I've had challenges when team has been very serious and tried to become a perfect Scrum team. That's almost impossible.
Right.
Team at some point will have to make the Scrum work for their team and actually be agile versus just do Scrum.
And that's the hardest part, is to get them into the mindset, to get everybody into the mindset. And sometimes you have to let them fail. Sometimes with a new team, they'll say, oh, we think we're good enough to just stop doing stand-ups.
Yeah.
And you have to fight the urge to say, no, you absolutely cannot.
Yeah.
And just say, all right, maybe for the next week we don't do stand-ups.
Nice.
And then see how that goes and
Nice.
see, well, how did you communicate? Well, we didn't.
Yeah, I really like how you're coming in from an experimentation perspective. Like, okay, let's see it for another few weeks and see how it goes. And then they will have the answer instead of you making them do it. So that's a really good one. So we talked about the daily stand-up. We talked about the sprint planning. We talked about the sprint review and the retrospective. So those are the 4 core ceremonies. Anything outside of that you want to cover in terms of the Scrum?
I think it's really important for an Agile coach or a Scrum Master to be very much in tune with their team, especially when a team is getting off the ground, and maybe even for years after that, they don't always see the things that you see.
Yeah.
Because you have a lot of experience, you pay attention a lot, and sometimes you can go into a retrospective and say, they'll come up with some things, but then you'll say, well, here's what I saw, and maybe they don't even realize it. So you have to be extremely observant.
Yeah.
You have to be really careful, like we talked about, not to give them a lot of rules, but let them find out things for themselves, what work and what don't work. And what's interesting is sometimes teams will come up with things that I never even thought of, and then I can add that to my bag of tricks. And so I think it's important to not be too stringent, to kind of let them do, but you kind of have to provide that guidance.
So, Barb, let's talk about what are some things that Scrum Master shouldn't be and shouldn't do, or you would advise new Scrum Master not do.
Well, I can tell you some things I did when I was a new Scrum Master that maybe weren't exact. So when I was a new Scrum Master, I had one team. It had 9 people on them, and I had previously been on that team for a year, so I was now becoming their Scrum Master. And one thing that I did was I thought, well, Scrum Master isn't going to take up all my time, so I'm just going to continue working on that team in my old capacity and work as a Scrum Master, which I thought was going to work really great.
Yeah.
But what happened was, you find out when you're a Scrum Master that you have to be a neutral party. And when I was doing work for the team, I was almost leaning toward things that I wanted. Here's some things that I want to change for the team. So I was letting my Scrum Master kind of pull the team in that direction rather than being a neutral party.
Yeah. And you were a development manager at some point too. Was that before or after?
I was not a development manager at any point. But thank you very much for that vote of confidence.
Sure. So yeah, one thing that I see is, when I first learned Scrum, I would go to the team members and I would say, this is right and this is wrong. And, one of the things that I realized when people kind of hear if they're wrong, they immediately shut down and there's no opportunities.
Right.
For it, it's kind of, everything shuts down. So like not using those words is something that I'm very mindful of. Anything else you can think of?
I think I had experiences with that too. If somebody would come with an idea that I didn't think was quite right, my first word out of my mouth would be, no,
that sucks.
Here's how we have to do it. Exactly. And so I started to do some research and kind of brainstorming techniques on how to support a team in brainstorming, and how, it's pretty obvious that if you say no the first time, that's going to shut people down. But also, saying yes the first time can also shut them down. If you have a team of 10 people, if somebody comes up with an idea and it sounds pretty good and you go, great idea, let's do that, let's make a committee, let's do it, then you're missing everybody else's idea. You're missing the chance for that idea to be developed in a much better way. Maybe that person wasn't even that interested in that idea. It was just the first thing that they thought. And that's something people don't always think about, is if you agree with the first thing and then move on, which I am, very much a doer. I know you are as well.
Yeah.
You want to go. You want to do stuff.
Yep.
It's hard to take time and go, well, let's hear everybody's idea, then we'll kind of modify it. But that's important too.
Yeah, so this is the overly excited Scrum Master.
Exactly.
Yes to everything. And we talked about the controlling Scrum Master. Can you think of any other personas?
So I would say, if you're looking at a triangle and you have controlling over here and overexcited over here you have is way too passive. The Scrum Master that just stands back and thinks things and never says anything, or doesn't speak up or doesn't help coach. I've actually coached Scrum Masters where after the first experience with them, I said, well, when are you going to start coaching them? Because there were some really great opportunities to at least, even just encourage them, even at the end, instead of saying, okay, we're done. You can say, I really liked the way you did this, and encourage them. So you also have to be very much participatory and kind of, especially as an Agile coach where I have 6 teams, I'm not really part of that team, but I can definitely be their really good friend.
Yep, definitely. So let's talk about facilitation.
Okay.
In our world, software world, there were a lot of project managers and business analysts, and whenever even the wording that we use, the word choice we use, we talk about running a meeting or all these things. So can you share a little bit more about what does facilitation mean to you?
So facilitation is something that when I was a new Scrum Master, I did not think was that important. In fact, I always thought facilitation just meant you were kind of doing the typing. When everybody, you're projecting maybe, or saying, oh, hey, we're running out of time. And of course, those are very important things, but it's also helping everybody get heard. If you have the person that talks way too much, there's ways to kind of, cut them off. You can, in fact, I was doing a facilitation workshop and I was showing people as you're walking around how to get people to stop talking. And one of the ways is, you kind of walk around the room as a facilitator, and if there's somebody who's talking a lot, you walk behind them. And then they're kind of stop and they will look behind, and then you can jump right in right there.
That is smart.
You use a lot of
nonverbal cues.
Nonverbal cues, or you can turn your back on them. So
turn your back.
If you're kind of, we were in a U shape there, and somebody's talking, and somebody over here, on the other side needs to talk, you walk in and face that person and then put your back to the, and it's not so that you're not saying, hey, stop talking.
So you're
just giving them that cue. Or you can even just put your hand out. Thank you, and then they usually stop. So, but some, again, back to that passive Scrum Master, if you're passive, then you just let them go. And then everybody's mad at you. So.
That's I'll definitely apply to what you shared about not stopping, but like facilitating in a way where everybody gets a chance to share.
Right.
What else do you do if somebody's a little bit quiet and you need them to talk and participate? Do you have any examples or things that you?
Yeah, and we find that a lot because there are a lot of introverts. Out there. And honestly, the worst thing you can do if there's an introvert that's not talking in your meeting is to call them out. Hey, you, talk, because that even makes them, less likely to talk the next time.
Actually, so for me, I'm an ambivert. So I'm a mix between an introvert and extrovert. So I have both. But at some point I had when I was new in my career, I was a little bit more on the introverted side. I was not very confident about sharing my ideas. And when I work with team members, I see that, and that's one of the things that what I've done is actually, because some people are really good at coming up with ideas on spot. Like they are, whenever they're in a group, they will just kind of dominate the group and have a lot of ideas. It doesn't mean that introverts don't have ideas. They just come about giving ideas in a different way. So one of the things that I've used is like Scrumbler, where I give them, and if it's a retrospective, I give them a day in advance to kind of think through it, because it's, they're equally intelligent and have great ideas. They actually need more time. So thanks for sharing that.
Exactly, and I think that's a really good point that we should all remember more often is, we call a meeting and we ask for ideas. If you're catching people on the spot, even extroverts can have better ideas in the car on the way home than they have if you put them on the spot. Yeah,
are you an extrovert?
I am an extreme extrovert. Yes, I am. And one of the things at the beginning of my career, you asked me, kind of I forgot that not everybody wants to be like me, so I would just greet people in the morning and be like, hi, everybody. And I sat next to this man, and he was an extreme introvert. And I was like, I'm going to make friends with him if it kills both of us. And it almost did. But then after a while, I started to realize that, I was coming in, say, on Monday morning, and I'd say, hi, how are you doing? How's your weekend? And, he was just kind of recoiling. So after a while, I started just going, morning. And after a few days, then he's like, morning. And I'm like, okay, I'm talking his language. So you kind of mirror how but you have to be aware of that. And for a long time, I wasn't. And I think it was that experience that caused me to start to look at everybody and go, let me communicate with them in the way they want to be communicated with.
Yeah, that's great. And that's one big thing on my way of like implementing Agile or helping people learn about. So it's much more being, and we're driving change, but we're not trying to make everybody extroverts, or we're not changing people. We're just enabling them in a way where everybody can work together. And when we talk about impediments, so when people are not aware of personality types and the group dynamics and how people work, in a way that can be impediments. And that's one thing that Agile coaches do.
It's true, and as we talked about, sometimes the coach can be the impediment, and that's a whole different story. But I think what we try to do here is we try to hire in people that are intelligent and capable and have great potential, and we turn them into full stack developers by teaching, pairing, helping. But as Agile coaches, what we're trying to do is the same thing as turning them into full stack people with the same types of methods.
I like that. Yeah.
Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We'll be sure to come back with more exciting videos on Agile topics.